Asian African Legal Consultative Organization, and everybody knows the distinguished jurist, Professor B Mani, Director, School of Law and Governance, Jaipur National University, and one of my close friends, Father Elite, at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Shri Raju Ramachandran, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, esteemed Dr. Yasugata Fukahori, Deputy Secretary General, Asian African Legal Consultative Organization, Professor Gurdeep Singh Bahari, probably will be joining us in a few minutes. He is Dean of Faculty of Law, Delhi University, again great well-wisher, friend and promoter of South Asian University. Professor B S Chimney, again I am very privileged to have a long, a fairly large number of my friends, well-wishers and guide supporters. Professor Chimney is chairperson, Center for International Legal Studies at JNU. Many people believe that we are creating a coterie of people from JNU. I will always take pride in saying that certain coteries, they need to be created, they need to be cultivated. In fact, if you really mean to promote art academics, I think in India, you don't have to go too far to locate the best of the attainment, best of academic. So therefore, I take full pride and privilege in inviting all these friends who are here. I, on my own behalf, and on behalf of the South Asian University, warmly welcome you all, sir, with gratitude and admiration. Today is a special occasion in the short span for which we have existed. I believe we are about 2.5-year-old child. Is that right? 2.5-year-old child. But thanks to the dynamic leadership of Professor Tyagi and his team, dedicated team, I think we are progressing fairly satisfactorily. We are making our presence felt, and today's function is a very clear manifestation of a very bold initiative and step in that direction. I know esteemed Mr. Sen has written this book. This book should mean quite a lot to those who pursue legal studies, those who wish to look at various issues in various form and content, those who would like to be enlightened about complexities of legal situations, cases, and other things. They will find very rich material in this book, and I think it will set them thinking for themselves. Perhaps the whole process of academic debate is likely to ensue in a very effective manner. In a way, we are privileged, sir, that you agreed to come and give us the benefit of not only listening to you, but also being a party to the excitement that is usually attached to the release of a book. May I, to begin with, make a request to our LLM students to present bouquet to the esteemed speaker of this afternoon. I don't know what the division, who will. This bouquet comes to you directly from Lahore. May I now make a formal request to kindly introduce the speakers. Must be done behind.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. B Sen, Mr. President of the University, the Dean, and all distinguished speakers, and fellow students. I'm still a student. And fellow students, welcome to this occasion. It is quite a privilege for me even to sit with Mr. B Sen. I've seen him from a distance, then slowly closer and closer. I did not work with him in the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee. Those days was committee like people like Govinda Chindi or Yogesh Tyagi. But I have been watching the work of the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee as such under his stewardship. He nurtured that organization. And if you look at this book, at least in 3 places he says it had only 12 members to begin with. It was struggling hard to expand. Suddenly it's expanded to 40 members. Right. And that credit certainly goes to Mr. B Sen. There is only one part of Mr. B Sen I knew. But the book reveals a wide variety of aspects, multifaceted Mr. B Sen. Being a barrister of laws, the way he studied for the call to the bar. Particularly, I like the expression he used, you had to eat so many dinners. Eat so many dinners to the term. And he, among others, was invited by no less a person than the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Kania. And it was not an easy decision for him to come back and start the first group, small group of Supreme Court bar, if I may say so. Then he narrates how he was a witness to many an important case decided by the Indian Supreme Court. There was a number of cases, starting with A.K. Gopalan, the arguments raised in India. It is exciting. Even to those who know only very little of international law and nothing else. And the manner in which he explains, I don't know whether I am shooting much before it is necessary, because the President asked me to introduce the speakers. I introduced Mr. B Sen in that sense. The manner in which Supreme Court evolved itself, the dramatic personality, the various judges, his perception of each individual judge, to me it is exciting. that only shows that knowledge of law is not good enough. You also need to know the text before whom you are arguing. And the pride with which he explains his association with L.C. Sutherland, George Perry. Then, of course, his association with the Ministry of External Affairs, the Indus Treaty, and various international arbitrations, various instances from relating to international law, in fact, the B Sen who comes out of this book, he's an exciting personality. I did not know of that personality. Until I read this book, sir, I did not know this. It is a great privilege for me to sit here and even introduce him. I'm much younger in all respects, not just in age. We have a number of speakers for this afternoon. Mr. Raju Ramchandran, again a person who doesn't need any introduction, particularly after the Gujarat cases. I think that summarizes Raju Ramchandran. Professor B Sen, I suppose you have this. Professor B Sen, he has been a colleague of mine for a long time, along with the dean, I think since 1973, if I remember correctly. Dr. Yasukanta Fukahori, which is your last name? Okay. Dr. Fukahori Yasukanta. Yes. He is from Asian African Legal Consultative Organization. He has a PhD in political science and economics. And he has been working in various fields such as WTO, FTA, EAP. I don't know what these are. He has negotiated issues relating to international law with the USTR and other offices of US government must be. When Japan was negotiating Japan-ASEAN EPA rules with the ASEAN countries, Dr. Fukahori was the chairman of the working group on cooperation. He was also associated with the World Bank. Well, I think this is a fair we have for the evening. How do we start? Okay. Could you start?
How have we organized it? Because I will see meeting one.
Sure.
But Mani, you may be right in saying that you are too junior or younger to introduce him. By that token, I get to take birth. Because I'm absolutely outside. But pardon me for my ignorance. But there is always a scope and tremendous possibilities for disciplines to come together. The cubicalization of education which used to govern our learning and teaching processes so far, they are certainly breaking down. And I am a very average, humble student of economics. I know economics cannot stand on its own anymore unless you are at least familiar with the very basics of legal proceedings, issues, intertwined with economic exchanges. Even one single example of international trade is throwing up the whole host of it. Therefore, all of us have to seek an opportunity of being his disciples and learners advocate. But you will kindly allow me to leave for another meeting. This is on e-governance. Unless we are strong in e-governance, we will not be able to administer South Asia as one single academic entity. Please, sir, with your permission. And I wish you do very well. I'd like to meet you again. Very important. राजा रामचंद्र रखते काम
So could I request Mr. Raju Ramchandran to give us his reflections on Mr. B Sen's reflections? I'm just looking at this paper.
Professor Mani, Mr. I am the only plebeian because we have a person of the towering eminence of Mr. Sen and very distinguished academics. I am a mundane bread and butter lawyer. My only claim to fame is that I was one of those who persuaded Mr. Sen to write this book. I have known Mr. Sen from the beginning of my practice, which is 36 years back. I was a distant admirer of his, not having the courage to go up to him. Today, I have the privilege of being called a friend by him. Now, I wish to focus on Mr. Sen, the court lawyer, the Sen which, that part of B Sen which emerges from this book. The other aspects of his manifold achievements will be touched upon by the other speakers. Now, what comes out from these reminiscences is the value and importance of someone like Mr. Sen, who is an old world classical lawyer, not a lawyer with high academic degrees, which are valued today and quite justifiably so in this age of specialization. But someone who is a generalist. Mr. Sen started practice from the beginning of the Supreme Court. He was a witness to the inauguration of the Supreme Court. He has handled cases in the field of constitutional law, of course, income tax, sales tax, criminal law, zamindari abolition, electricity law. Name the branch of law, and Mr. Sen has handled at least one case in that branch of law. It is mind-boggling that someone who is not that way an academic specialist could handle this variety of work and also develop an interest in the field of international law and international relations, which starts from his attending a summer school before his return to India, being nominated by the then Attorney General to the External Affairs Ministry, showing an interest in getting trained in the British Foreign Office, and such a person has acquired such mastery over international law and international relations. But coming back to my principal point, we often ask, how can an IAS officer be the finance secretary? How can an IAS officer be a telecom secretary? Mr. Sen is an example of a generalist who, by sheer application and interest, has acquired mastery over different subjects. Professor Chadha was talking just now about international trade and law. Now, in this age of convergence, the Stanford Law School has 3 niche LLM courses, unlike major American universities which offer several well-known general LLMs. The 3 niche courses in Stanford are law and economics, law and corporate governance, and law, science and technology. This illustrates the importance of convergence and it is a broad, general Catholic outlook of classical lawyers like Mr. Sen, which saw this interdependence, this interconnectedness, this convergence long before his time. Now, Mr. Sen, as a lawyer, comes to the Supreme Court in his early 20s, as Professor Mani mentioned. Chief Justice Kania invited lawyers practicing before the Privy Council to return to India to set up the nucleus of the Supreme Court bar. Today Delhi is a place where every third lawyer lays claim to being an eminent lawyer. But at that time, when the Supreme Court was being set up, this book brings out that there was no bar worth the name, because there was only the district bar in Delhi, the district courts. Even the circuit bench of the Punjab High Court had not been set up in Delhi. And so some judges felt that Delhi is not an appropriate place at all to set up a Supreme Court. There's no great legal tradition. It should have been in Allahabad, it should have been in Madras, it should have been in Bombay, it should have been in Calcutta. And so, Mr. Sen, along with a few brave others, responded to that invitation and set up the Supreme Court bar. When you read this book, you will be surprised at the kind of intimacy and warmth between lawyers and judges. Mr. Sen says that he started calling on the judges. Chief Justice Mayachand Mahajan asked him for dinner the next evening so that he could meet people. Chief Justice Mahajan threw a party to celebrate Mr. Sen's wedding. That was a different era, a different court. But it was necessary. You were creating an institution at that time. It was a cooperative endeavor of bar and bench to set up an institution. And therefore, all this was very, very natural. But nobody should think that this kind of familiarity between lawyers and judges made the slightest difference to the result of cases. Mr. Sen narrates an incident where he invited late Chief Justice S.R. Das to the Gymkhana Club for breakfast because he had a weakness, Chief Justice Das, for eggs and bacon. And then after breakfast, they went their respective ways. Mr. Sen appeared before Chief Justice Das and his petition was promptly dismissed. Today, of course, a judge will have to be careful, a lawyer will have to be careful if he is appearing before a judge the next day, let alone sharing breakfast in the morning. But the standards of rectitude which were then set are standards which we need to emulate even today. Mr. Sen gives his critical assessment of great lawyers and great judges who practiced in the Supreme Court, who sat in the Supreme Court. He has not minced his words. He has not been, you can't find him guilty of respectful ambiguity, which is something which we lawyers are very famous for. He has called a spade a spade. He is naturally distressed at the commercialization of the legal profession which he sees today. He thinks that a lawyer's fee must be a fee and nothing more than that. But I have one quarrel to pick with Mr. Sen. He says law is a noble profession. Let us not turn it into a business. Now I think he's being unfair to businessmen because for the reason that after all you have business ethics also, and you have ethical businessmen. So why should business be berated while we pride ourselves on the nobility of our profession? That is the only quarrel which I have with Mr. Sen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rajaram. You brought out classical lawyer in Mr. B Sen. Dr. Fukahuri.
Thank you very much. I'm very much pleased to be here. Since that our Secretary General, Dr. Muhammad, was away from I have a chance to come and attend this very important meeting. I'm very pleased to be here. You may not know about the organization, ALCO. ALCO is the international organization whose headquarters in New Delhi. And that was established in 1956. It's one of the oldest international organizations in Asia. And I'd like to point out that His Excellency, Mr. Sen, was the Secretary General of this organization for nearly 30 years. So that when this organization was founded after Burma meeting in 1956, there were only 7 member countries. Now there are 47 member countries under us from Asia, Africa, and Middle East countries. So this organization was nurtured while His Excellency Mr. Sen was the Secretary for 30 years. And I'd like to personally thank you, Your Excellency, for taking care of this organization, to making this organization to be grown up, mature organization. So we, all of us, in the secretary, still today appreciate your work. And I'd like to mention one of the most important achievements which ALCO did in the past 50 years was the achievement of 200 miles maritime economic zone. The concept of maritime economic zone was developed and introduced by ALCO when His Excellency was the Secretary. We all know that his personal contribution to this idea was so precious. Without him, this 200-mile maritime economic zone couldn't be achieved. If he wasn't the Secretary General of this organization, probably we do not have this system in the international society, even as of today. So we'll be working hard. Our purpose of our organization is to prevail rule of law in the Asian and African nations. And then reflect the voices of Asian and African countries to international society, both of which have been successfully implemented so far. And once again, that is thanks to the achievement made by section for the Senate. myself is the diplomat of Japan. I hold the degree in, not in law, but economics. In this society, in the 21st century, economic issues are very important. Our organization is working very hard so that in the area of economy, all the conflicts, contentions, and disputes can be carried out under the international system, particularly using the WTO dispute settlement system. And for that direction, our organization is working really hard. And having said that, we have been cooperating with many organizations, including the organizations in EU. Although ALTO is the international organization, we have our headquarters in Delhi. That is the privilege of our organization. We have chances to cooperate with the organization based in India, not only official organizations, but from private organizations as well. And in recent years, under the guidance of the new Secretary General, Dr. Muhammad, we'll be promoting cooperation with the universities in India. I noted there are many alumni in this room. Dr. Sen is actually University former Secretary General, but apart from him, there are many former legal officers who contributed to our organization. As the professor of South Asian universities, most of them. So this is kind of alumni meeting for us. I'm very much impressed. So that since that, so we have a good potential for this university, South Asian University, and our to work together. I'd like to. This is the first time for me to be here, but I would like to use this as a basis of our cooperation, and then I look forward to working and cooperating together with your university, and also the participants, and also from His Excellency further guidance and cooperation to us. Okay, it's a little bit short remarks, but thank you very much.
That is Deputy Secretary General,
my teacher, Professor Mani, my other teacher, Mr. Sen, distinguished speakers, and my colleague and friend, the Dean of the Law School, Professor Yogesh Tyagi. It's truly a privilege and an honor to be invited to speak about the life and work of Mr. Sen. I'm completely, to be honest, overwhelmed. I must admit that despite my best efforts, I could get my hands on the book only yesterday morning. But it was an extremely humbling experience even to glance through the book. It is truly astounding how much Mr. Sen has accomplished in a single lifetime. In my view, there are very few who can match the achievements of Mr. Sen. Indeed, he has been an active participant in the shaping of the destiny of modern India. He has been a witness, as Professor Mani said, to the most momentous events in the life of this country, but not from the sidelines like many of us, but as an active actor, as a principal actor in many of these events. He has worked or rubbed shoulders with the most illustrious figures of the bar, bench, academia, and government. It's truly a who's who of modern India that Mr. Sen interacted with, or who called upon Mr. Sen to lend his services to shaping or realizing the national interests of this country. From Prime Minister Nehru to Mrs. Gandhi to a range of foreign secretaries over the years, he has interacted with all of them at close quarters. And there's one sort of incident that he narrates, which reflects the times in which there was a certain camaraderie between the top leadership and the bureaucracy and legal advisors, where he describes how Mr. Nehru, Pandit Nehru, walks into a room where you were deliberating on an issue and sat on the edge of a table and joined the conversation. And when Pandit Nehru made an observation on the case that was being discussed, Mr. Sen, who held a contrary view, briefly walked out the room and came back with the Indian Penal Code to correct him. And it also speaks volumes of Pandit Nehru that he graciously accepted the advice that he was offered. Mr. Raju Ramchandran has already discussed his achievement as one of the founding figures of the bar. And he's also mentioned the canvas that Mr. Sen covered in his work. So it was not even simply domestic law and international law. Within domestic law, it was a whole range of areas, and within international law, he addressed a whole variety of subjects. The modern phrase for which sir is multitasking, and sir was multitasking at that point of time. So if you look at if I simply list, what I wish to do is simply list out the achievements that Mr. Sen has so far as international law and relations is concerned. Simply listing it out gives you the enormity of what he's achieved. He was, to begin with, the legal advisor to the Ministry of External Affairs for over 10 years, sir, advising on different legal aspects of key foreign policy matters. And remember that here he was advising the Prime Minister himself or others in very key positions in the government, and that meant enormous responsibility as well. He was at the same time the founder, as we've just been told by our colleague Dr. Fukahori, of the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee, in the year 1956. And he was the Secretary General for decades of the organization. It was literally his child. The antecedents of which, as you all know, go back to the Bandung Conference in 1955. And actually, if I may say, the antecedents go back even earlier to the famous League Against Imperialism that was convened in the year 1928, and which was attended by key freedom leaders of freedom movements from Asia and Africa. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the delegate, one of the delegates from India. And so it was through the League Against Imperialism, through the Asian Relations Conference, which was held in Delhi, and then the Bandung Conference, and that led to, that culminated in the creation of the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee. But having created it, even while he was an active member of the bar, one of the founding members of the bar, he carefully, as the colleague said, nurtured this organization, which has grown from a small organization to an organization which is of 47 member states, addressing a whole range of advising governments on a whole range of issues of international law. Besides this, Mr. Sen is also responsible for the creation, as I understand it, of the International Law Association in India. The Indian branch of the International Law Association is essentially a contribution of Mr. Sen, and he continues to be associated with it. So he literally took international law to the world of practice. He literally introduced international law to the practitioners of these generations by bringing the International Law Association to New Delhi. Then, Mr. Sen has also played a crucial role in relation to developing concepts, ideas in several areas of international law. One of which was just mentioned, to which Mr. Sen devoted years of study. This was the United Nations Convention, negotiation of the United Nations Convention on the law of the sea. He followed it closely. He advised governments, and governments heard him very, very carefully. And he, as was said, was also responsible for the idea of the concept of exclusive economic zone. But besides law of the sea, there were so many other areas. In some cases, I had the opportunity to work with him, in which he contributed ideas. He contributed to the shaping of the law. This related to subjects as wide apart as the legal status of refugees, which led to the adoption in 1966 by ALCC of what is known as the Bangkok principles. Just to have a student to help you out with the memories. He also actively participated in the work related to the then evolving law of diplomatic immunity, the Geneva Convention, and not to forget, as was again mentioned, to the then evolving work on international trade law. He was actively participating in providing ideas to the institution, the organization UNCITRAL, which is the United Nations Conference on international trade law. I can go on and on, but these are just few subjects that I'm listing, which he was actively engaged with. He was constantly thinking about, and this was in his role as Secretary General of ALCO, besides the other hats that he was simultaneously wearing. And Mr. Sen then was also involved in several cases, as Professor Mani mentioned, in advising several cases in which India was involved. He also contributed to the working of several other institutions or bodies, including his presence in the Sixth Committee of the UN General Assembly and in the regional organizations. Whose members were also members of ARCO. This is the organization again was called African Unity, now called African Union. The last but not the least of his contribution to the domain of international law and relations, one is of course one always tends to think of him as a practitioner. But I think this text, or whatever little I have read, is simultaneously a scholarly work. So it's not simply a narration of events. It offers scholars insights into the working of the international legal process. It offers insights into how international law is framed, how it evolves. Besides this, I don't know how many of you read, I may not get the title right, but one of his sort of path-breaking books, the Handbook on International Law and Diplomacy. Yes, I got the title right. Diplomatic law. Handbook on diplomatic. Handbook on a good international lawyer and add the word international law. So it's very often very easy to forget that he's simply not a practitioner. He has contributed to the scholarly world, and you would be very rewarded if you studied it, if you studied that work closely. Before I turn to a personal note of what I learned by working with him, I just want to remind young scholars here that he was doing this under very difficult conditions. That he was not doing this under easy conditions. We must remember that he was doing this work when access to literature and international law was not easy. There was no internet. There were no photocopying facilities. There was no community of international lawyers where you could simply walk across and have a discussion. So in a sense, it was a lonely journey, and you had to rely on your own resources, as it were, in order to find the right responses and right responses to questions which have very deep consequences, which are serious consequences for the national interest of the country. So the kind of responsibilities he shouldered can be gauged from this. Let me just briefly, I think I've already gone on for long, but let me make 2 or 3 points. So I had the real privilege and honor as a very young graduate from Jawaharlal Nehru University to join the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee, to at some point come in contact with Mr. Sen when I and Mr. Tyagi, we were assigned different work, and then he would call us into his room and discuss with us. And we were really intimidated. It was Sir's habit that he would never look at you directly. He was always staring out of the window of the Asian African League. So we didn't know, we couldn't look at his face and try and assess, have we got this wrong or have we got this right? But there are two things, in fact, I really learned from him. One thing I learned, I don't know whether Sir remembers this because I'm sure he's been so much advice to so many people. The one thing he taught me was that it's good you have come from an academic university, but when you address legal issues, it's best to first think through them logically. Think through the values that you're trying to achieve through this, through the brief that you are writing. Have, in other words, clarity about the goals, and then think about reading the scholarly literature to assist you in framing your response, rather than be weighed in by this enormous amount of scholarly literature that existed. And this lesson I have carried through my career. I was just going to say I'm an old man, but when Professor Mani says this, so he's been my teacher. But I have aged as well. But I learned this important lesson, and the other important lesson that I learned from him was that in an organization like ALCO, you have to accommodate a diversity of interests. So it was not your view, or it was not particular view that needed to be carried through. That you have to understand the diversity of interests that were at play, then look at the goals that you were trying to achieve, and then try and frame the policy and accompanying law in this regard. The second thing which overlaps with this, that he wanted the papers very brief and lean and brief, without needless academic rhetoric. We came from JMU, and for us, rhetoric was as important, if I may say so, as the content. And it took some while to adjust to Mr. Sen's sort of inclinations in the form. But that again has to be, a good state. I've learned that there are some kind of writings which are amenable to academic flourish. You require some amount of academic flourish, but there are other kinds of writing, the more pragmatic writings, which need to be lean and mean as if it were. A third thing I just wanted to mention, I think we haven't said enough. I found Mr. Sen always a very warm person, and if I may say so, a very shy person. This was how I imagined that, despite being a more larger than life figure, he was essentially a very a person who kept with himself, and it was very difficult to draw him out. And we, as young people, would try. And I'm sure he did that with Mr. Seetalbhat and Mr. Daftari, and I read somewhere that... And Fitzmaurice. So I read that about Fitzmaurice, where Fitzmaurice essentially ignored Mr. Sen for a long period of time. And then he sought the advice of his secretary, and his secretary told him the French food that he enjoyed, and the the restaurant that he liked to visit. And advised Mr. Sen that why don't you go up to Mr. Fitzmaurice and invite him for lunch. And when he went there, so then Mr. Fitzmaurice asked him, so where are you taking me? Usually he was very stern, but he was delighted that he was being taken out to lunch. And when Mr. Sen mentioned to him that this is the kind of sort of cuisine he had in mind, then he asked which restaurant, and I think a Prunier or one such name. And immediately Professor Fitzmaurice picked up his bowler hat, and I was fascinated by the fact that he would carry an umbrella, and this is a good Englishman, even if there was no cloud, even if there was no cloud at a distance. So we try to do this often, that's how young people are. We would try and draw him out, but Sir was very shy, if I may say so. A final, if I may, after all this, Sir, I have not read your book in detail, but if there is one absence I felt.
It's one story that
Yeah, as I was glancing through, I stopped in places and where it caught my attention. But I found one absence which I felt, and I thought I should share that. As well. That there's very little reference to the Indian academia in the field of international law in your work. There are of course references to international law professors such as of course Quincy Wright and Percy Corbett. I found you mentioned that you train foreign law officers in collaboration with the School of International Studies. So I was hoping that there would be a mention also of the international law gurus, other gurus of mine besides the two sitting here, Professor Anand, Professor Khan, and many others. That's the only, and I felt that that would have rounded off your already colossal achievement. This is not a complaint, sir. I'm just saying, if you write a sequel to this, I would be very, I would look forward to reading of that engagement, as well, because I think the academia, I must mention to young scholars here, that the academia was grappling with precisely the kind of problems that practitioners were grappling with, as to how do we, what I've called the problem of dualism. That on one hand, international law had originated in colonialism, so was colonial international law. At the other hand, you have to simultaneously use that same international law to advance the interests of post-colonial states. So how did you manage that? On one hand, oppose what you didn't like, at the same time try to push the discourse in a direction, where it could be used to the advantage of the developing countries, to the third world countries. But I must admit, after having said that, I must admit, as was said, that on second thoughts, you trained most of the academia. On second thoughts, you trained most of us. And so, in that sense, your contributions in your engagement with international law scholarship was also a pioneering effort. So to conclude, sir, it has been an absolute privilege, sir, and this comes from the depth of my heart. So it was an absolute privilege to have worked and interacted, had the privilege of interacting with you. I wish you a very healthy and productive life. And I'm looking forward to more such volumes, and I hope Mr. Raju Ramchandran can persuade you to do a sequel. And I hope you leave more footprints, as they say, on the sands of time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Govind. Mr. Raju Ramchandran said that he omitted to mention something. Could I give him an opportunity? Then I would certainly call upon Dean Tiagi. He can't keep quiet.
Why did I omit something? You see, we lawyers, some of us, though we are told to have a thick skin, some of us are very sensitive. We want to finish our argument before the judge says we have heard you enough. So I wanted to wind up before I could see any visible signs of fidgeting by Professor Mani. But I thought I needed to make just a couple of other points. You know, the dictionary meaning of eminent is well known and well respected. The dictionary meaning of eminent is not how often you appear on television. Now, it is a tragedy that many of today's young lawyers had not heard of Mr. B Sen, since he doesn't come to court every day now, until they were introduced to him through this book. One of the founding fathers of the Supreme Court was not known to a whole generation of lawyers, and that is also partly due to the self-effacing nature of old world lawyers like Mr. Sen. If I were to ask people in this audience as to who was India's candidate for UN Secretary General, I'm sure 90% will say Shashi Tharoor. How many people know that Mr. B Sen was proposed for UN Secretary Generalship? Not a career diplomat, a practicing lawyer with interest in international law, had attained that stature that he was seriously considered by India as its nominee for UN Secretary Generalship, and it is only because of the politics of the Cold War that his name did not go through. That is the level of achievement and eminence of Mr. Sen, who, picking up from what Dr. Chimney said about working in different times and different circumstances, Professor Chimney said, no internet, no mouse, no photocopier, no mobile phone. Of course, he doesn't have a, in principle, objection to mobile phone in the way in which Professor Tyagi has, but these are the times in which he made this monumental contribution. And if there is one lesson for the students of today, I say this to my junior colleagues at the bar, and I would like to say this to young LLM students here who may become academics, who may become practicing lawyers, who may join the government. Never forget the technique of holding a book. Never forget how to look at a digest. Don't throw up your hands in despair if there's a power cut and your internet is not working. Don't become such a slave of technology. And if I may conclude with the words of another great contemporary lawyer, also of Mr. Sen's generation, Mr. Fali Nariman. I was at a conference, a legal conference, I'm not sure when we lawyers confer among each other for a case, that's also called a conference. And there was this bright young lawyer who was searching his laptop looking for a case, and in his characteristic robust language, Mr. Fali Nariman said, "Forget your bloody computer, it is more important to have a bloody mind." Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Today is a very auspicious day for South Asian University. It's a day when one is likely to burst with emotions, happiness, and also excitement. It is an extraordinary privilege when this function is chaired by a person who taught me ABCs of international law, my teacher, my mentor, one of my esteemed elders, personally. When I wrote my pre-doctoral thesis, I used a phrase for him to quote many encyclopedia of international law. Probably I underestimated his capacity to contribute. At that time, he is more than many encyclopedia. He is a vendor, he is a source of inspiration. It is an extraordinary privilege when we have in chief guest my teacher,
my mentor, my great well-wisher, a source of inspiration, not only to me, but also to the entire Asian African legal community. A person who remains grossly underestimated in terms of his public understanding of his achievements and contribution. A person more you meet with him, more inspired you feel. It's not a small thing to have a teacher, a mentor, a well-wisher of Mr. B Sen's caliber. I'm so happy, I'm so delighted, I'm so privileged, like my friend who have worked with him to find Mr. B Sen continuously evaluate us with all of his inspiration and support. I'm also very lucky that my best friend, who is on my left, with his permanent left leanings, is also and I'm also very thankful to His Excellency Dr. Yasir graciousness to come here. And my esteemed friend and esteemed, distinguished and very eminent and socially conscious, eminent jurist and lawyer, Mr. Raju Ramchandran. I don't have words of appreciation for you. I feel inspired, I feel encouraged, and I wish I was as active as you have been. Many thanks for being here. In the company of your friends and wishes, you cannot keep quiet. One should not keep quiet. And you could see that my throat has become better because of your inspiration, sir, and because of Mr. Sen's presence here. I would like to share a few things by focusing on three aspects. One, the book. Second, the person. And third, the contribution. First, about the book. 60 years in 311 pages is remarkable. It's difficult to condense all your experiences in 311 pages. Amazing. To quote, it is brief but in depth. That was the phrase told to us by Mr. Sen when we worked with him. Tyagi, be brief but in depth. Sir, this book is illustration of what you taught us. Be brief but in depth. How can you write a book of 311 pages without a footnote? Amazing. You have again a living example, a book without a footnote. It should be a source of inspiration for those people who want to write a term paper and have to complete the minimum requirement of words, and easiest thing to have heavy footnotes. It is possible to bring your thoughts in substance without being formalistic. This is one quality of book. This book tells a lot. At the same time, this book hides a lot. I shall come to the second aspect later. Let me just focus on that this book tells a lot. This book should be a compulsory reading who want to do international law. This book should be a compulsory reading who want to practice in any Indian court or in any court in fact. This book should be a compulsory reading for every judge, every legal practitioner in any part of the world, and certainly in India. And this book should be a compulsory reading for also for politicians, particularly for those who want to settle some scores with the ruling party now. It has plenty of ammunition. It has some of those cases, some of those stories, some of those events very elegantly articulated which are not part of contemporary debate on, for instance, political corruption. If you want to know the history of political corruption in this country, this book should be a compulsory reading. You cannot find more authoritative account of certain scandals that took place in the history of this country, because we were not told, because they are not commonly known. But if you read this book, you will find a very, very authoritative account, and of course brief but in-depth account of some of those scandals. So unconsciously, I am communicating to opposition that if you want to strengthen your arguments and the Kejriwals, this book could be a readily available, excellent source of information to expose the political elite of this country about the claims they make about their propriety and others. This book is a journey of a young 21-year-old person from London to New Delhi and to different parts of the world. This book tells you about predicament of a person who is educated in West but looks East and can't forget West. It is an amazing accommodation of personal interest with national interest. It's an amazing account of how to excel in life. It is an interesting way of maximizing your potential by taking extraordinary creative initiatives. This book tells you a lot about Privy Council, about Federal Court, about old Supreme Court, and also about new Supreme Court. Who is there in this world today who had the privilege of practicing in 3 different courts in the world of the kind? From Privy Council to Federal Court to old Supreme Court to new Supreme Court. Only one person, and that is the senior advocate of Supreme Court of India, Mr. B Sen. Friends, you are in the company of the senior advocate of India, which means South Asia. It's a privilege of extraordinary magnitude. One cannot easily digest it, but I'm delighted that we have this today. Another interesting aspect of the book is that this book is very critical of quite a few things, but at the same time this book has maintained its elegance. At no point of time you feel that you are reading an aggressive author. You don't feel that you have an agitator who is expressing his ideas. You feel that you have an honest person who is stating facts without mixing them with fictions. This kind of quality of an author is rare in modern world, particularly when people are inclined to use flowery language to highlight their own contribution and then having no problem in life laughing at others. In fact, on quite a few occasions you will find in the book that the author has laughed at himself, the author has exposed himself, the author has also tried to tell the reader that he is not perfect. He is also a person with some weaknesses, a very extraordinary quality of a person in the modern world, that is the author of this book. Yet another quality of this book is that it tells you about the evolution of policy making in this country. Policy making in Ministry of External Affairs, policy making in the Ministry of Law, policy making in the Ministry of Home Affairs. It also tells you about the politics of lawmaking. It also tells you about the politics of appointments. It also tells you about the rivalries. It also tells you about domestic politics. It also tells you how to settle score with your friends without being enemy of your friends. How to cut to size a person whom you think he or she is likely to be your competitor in due course. If you read pages after pages, you will find quite a few stories. For instance, I will give you one example. It talks about Kashmir. Nobody knows in India that Mr. B Sen has anything to do with Kashmir. But the fact is that Mr. Sen has a lot to do with Kashmir. Mr. Sen became a true Christian in Kashmir. Mr. Sen tried to save the political career of one of the most distinguished Kashmiri politicians. These qualities, these contributions are hardly known to anybody in any circles in India. I was wondering how come Mr. Sen is a Christian. All through our association, I used to wonder, Mr. B Sen, Christian, slightly uncertain, but not dare to ask this question because these are sensitive questions. But when I read the book, I found an honest, rational justification behind his love, his dedication, his involvement with Christian belief, his ethical values, his expectation from religion, his expectation from people. Those things inspired him to become a dedicated Christian. Of course, I know now he lives church every week like a true Christian. That you find in this book. And he's doing all this without writing a chapter on himself. That's amazing that you tell about yourself without telling about yourself. And you use those tiny pieces of information in the context of law, in the context of inquiry, in the context of politics, and you make that articulation extremely exciting that you find in his pages that he has written about his visit to Kashmir. I don't know whether he visited Kashmir second time, but his first experience is full of life and it will give you an idea about Kashmir politics also. I used to wonder why one person was removed, why second was brought and all that, but I found few answers to those after reading those relevant pages. Another aspect of the book is meticulous understanding, meticulous study, meticulous research into details, precise, even after 6 decades. I was wondering whether he kept notes from his 21-year-old history or how did he maintain to keep record of that much information. Unbelievable that you are writing a book in 21st century about the work that you had done 6 years ago when you was 21-year-old person. How do you keep notes? Sometimes I forget what I did yesterday. I don't know how come Mr. Sen remember what he did 6 years ago. Your memory is admirable. Please give us blessing that all of us have this kind of memory that will help my students in particular to write good exam. More you say about the book, less you feel that he has said about the book. I would like to summarize by saying that I wish I had that skill. I wish others had that skill to articulate one's experience of 60 years in such a short volume as this book is all about. This book can lead to many controversies. This book, if it is read in depth, this book can expose a large number of people. This book could be a learning for a large number of people if it is carefully read by people. It should be intensely reviewed in journals. Unfortunately, as to the best of my knowledge, this book has not been reviewed in academic periodicals. I strongly believe that this book deserves high quality of intensive, in-depth review in academic journals. And this aspect did not occur to us earlier. I promise you, sir, that we will take this initiative. My friend is here, who is editor and on the board of editors on a large number of journals. So I will request him to make use of his office to see that this book is reviewed in at least some of these journals. This book is a contribution of a person who is a diplomat, who is an international lawyer, who is a domestic lawyer, who is an institutional builder, and more than that, He's a wonderful human being. I invite all of my friends here to give him a big hand. Now I come to the second part. As you know, sir, that I usually take time, but I hope that cause justifies my taking time. And that aspect is about the contribution of Mr. B Sen. And here comes that subtle, gentle critique of the book, that this book hides a lot. This book tells a lot, this book hides a lot. And the remarks that I'm going to offer now will highlight how he hides in this book his achievements, which should be highlighted in any intellectual gathering. First, the B Sen as an institutional builder. My esteemed friend, Professor Jimmy, has already referred to that contribution. I shall build upon that point. Mr. B Sen as an institutional builder. Everybody knows that Mr. B Sen is the founding Secretary General of the Asian African Legal Committee. Everybody knows that he served the Asian African Legal Committee as Secretary General for the longest period any Secretary General served continuously. But not many people know that Asian African Legal Consultative Committee would not have come into existence even after Bandung Conference if Mr. B Sen had not planted this idea in the mind of the Chief Justice of Burma. It was Mr. B Sen's intellectual initiative that got support of the Chief Justice of Burma that led to the foundation of Asian African Legal Consultative Committee. Nowhere in this book he writes that he is the founder of Asian African Legal Committee. How can one write 6 decades of his experiences without mentioning that he was the founder of Asian African Legal Committee? Sir, this modesty is too much. But at the same time, it is very inspiring. I wish I am so modest. I wish to look modest at least now onwards after reading your book second time. Who could believe that this benign initiative was not easy to be accepted not only in India but Asia and Africa? And who could believe that this initiative will be accepted not only by developing countries but also the only developed country of Asia and Africa, that is Japan. Mr. Sen has soft power to Japan. Mr. Deputy Secretary General, I can share with you. This is first-hand information. He has a special love for Japan and the various reasons for that. I cannot share all the reasons with you. But at least one reason should be shared, and that is that Japan is the greatest financial contributor to the budget of Asian African Legal Committee. If that is in lighter way, he has sincere admiration for leadership of Japan that came at the time of the establishment of Asian Legal Consultative Committee. Japan is a founding member of Asian African Legal Committee. Great achievement, great accomplishment. I admire leadership of Japan for taking that initiative because that strengthened hands of Mr. B Sen, and the initiative that started with 7, now 47, not a small achievement. This is a very obvious institutional building contribution of Mr. B Sen. The second one, very beautifully articulated by my friend Professor Chimney. If ILA had some respect in India and in the international community, great credit for that goes to Mr. B Sen. He has never been a president of ILA in India, ILA India, but everybody knows in India that the real person, the backbone of ILA was Mr. B Sen. President happened to be a judge of Supreme Court of India, and the privileged people, they can claim many privileges, some they deserve and some they can extort. But the person who was real contributor to ILA was Mr. B Sen. I hope the organization is doing well. I hope that Mr. B Sen's inspiration is available still to the organization, and I'm sure it should grow more and more in India. It deserves more and more credit for its contribution and more prominence in academic world in particular. Then the second organization he had established in India and nurtured it very well. But one organization which he not only established, he did everything for that organization, from conception to establishment to organization to its functioning. Legal Entities Division. I have friends here on my right and in front of me who have served in the Legal Entities Division. This Legal Entities Division was an absolute, innovative, exclusive, creative idea of a very young person of 24 or 25 years of age, Mr. B Sen. I wish every 25-year-old person is so creative as Mr. B Sen and comes out with a brilliant idea of that kind. Not only he had that idea, he knew how to implement that idea. He traveled to London. He got training with one of the best minds in the field of international law, Judge Fitzmaurice, who became judge subsequently. At that time was legal advisor to the British Foreign Office, and laid down the foundation of legal and what we call today Legal Entities Division. I don't know whether you know the fact that Mr. B Sen was one of the 6 original Joint Secretaries of Ministry of External Affairs. One of the 6 original Joint Secretaries of Ministry of External Affairs. If you count the number of Joint Secretaries today, I don't know how many there are, probably 100 or about 100. That will tell you the importance of what he was at that time, even in terms of official recognition. But what is more exciting about that institutional building is the foundation he laid down about lawmaking. And that I will talk in terms of the B Sen as international lawmaker. My field is human rights. My friend's field is everything. Mr. Chimney is one of the greatest international lawyers we have in the world. Mr. Mani, again, one of the greatest international lawyers in the world. They know a lot. We know that in different fields we have been working and we start from scratch. But what we believe that we have made some contribution is that we have taken small steps and we try to build upon those steps so that they make some contribution to international law. Because the contribution of Asian, African countries and Latin American countries or third world countries is still not as much as it should have been. Mr. B Sen is one of the original exponents of what we call today third world approach to international law. And in the entire book, you will not find a single claim to that effect. He never said that he is founder or promoter or builder of third world approach to international law. Sir, again this modesty is unbearable. Because you talked of Afro-Asian attitude towards international law when people have not written even a single piece in any newspaper, forget about journal. I'm familiar with the contribution of international lawyers of this country. First article on Afro-Asian attitude to international law came through Professor R.P. Anand, but that came in 1960s. You started it well before that. So if tomorrow the history of third world approach to international law has to be written, if the history of Afro-Asian attitude to international law has to be written, one of the original exponents of that happens to be the Mr. B Sen we have with us today. That is what extraordinary contribution of Mr. B Sen is. Yet another contribution to Mr. B Sen is the B Sen, modern international lawmaker. I will give 3 examples to substantiate this point. Today, everybody talks about refugee law. It's one of the most popular subjects in academic circles. There was a time nobody in this country wanted to talk about refugee law. We had one person only in the whole country, in fact 2, who were the sole proprietor of claiming their expertise in the field of refugee law. Talking of refugee law, talking of refugee convention was something unacceptable in India. We never had any discussion. We did not have dissertation. We did not have a thesis. We never had any serious study about refugee law in this country for a long time. And then came a time when the B Sen as a thinker thought that this subject needs our exposure, and that was in response to criticism of lack of response to international refugee law by Asian African countries, and that culminated into the adoption of Bangkok Principles. Bangkok Principles are basically a critique of the then existing international refugee law. And the Bangkok Principles are also a step forward in the development, progressive development of international refugee law. And it did not stop there. I remember it was Mr. B Sen who made my friend Professor Chimney to work on refugee law. And if today I have on my left one of the greatest expert on refugee law, credit for that goes to my esteemed elder mentor, Mr. B Sen. Thank you very much, sir. If you have not asked my friend to work on refugee, I still remember burden sharing, Colombo conference, then the humanity would have not had the privilege of having one of the greatest experts in the field of refugee law in the form of Professor B. S. Chimney. Another area where today everybody talks, but there was a person who was ahead of his time, international investment law. Foreign investment in developing countries were considered something very bad in the 60s, 70s. In fact, winding up foreign investment was a trend, not welcoming foreign investment. It was Mr. B Sen who took an extraordinary initiative and came out with an innovation that foreign investment should come to developing countries, but not on the terms and conditions of developed countries, but on the terms and conditions that are acceptable to developing countries. He evolved 3 model agreements, and myself and my friend Professor Chimney had the privilege of participating in that exercise, where Asian African Legal Committee, under the leadership of Mr. B Sen, drafted 3 model agreements on international investment. The importance of that contribution can be understood by the fact that international legal materials thought it fit to publish those 3 model agreements in international legal materials. That would tell you the importance of non-binding, non-treaties, informal documents that were adopted by Asian African Legal Committee. There's a lot more to tell what his contribution was, but I'm conscious of time limitation. I would like to conclude by a suggestion. Slightly provocative, but academics have that strength to be provocative. And that suggestion is provocative but probably constructive too. This book deserves not only in-depth reviews, this book also deserves to be published in its 2nd edition. And I would like to revise the title of second edition. Instead of 66 decades of law, politics and diplomacy, I would say 62 years of law, politics and diplomacy that will cover up to 2012. The book was published in 2010. It will cover developments up to 2012. It should have one more chapter based on his experience of last 1 year. Probably not very satisfactory, but certainly not negligible. That experience needs to be recorded. That experience has to be read. That experience must be reviewed. And that experience should become the basis of future of international law in this country. I don't want to be more specific, but I hope those who know it know what I am suggesting. I'll be more provocative when I'll be speaking on the revised edition of this book. Sir, this faculty is grateful to you for granting this privilege. We rarely review, we rarely have book discussions, but this token of affection is presented to you in the form of this discussion. We want you to remain a source of inspiration to all of us. We wish you good health, we wish you happiness, and we wish that you continue to bless all of us in India, in South Asia, in Asia, in Africa, in third world, and anywhere where people care for international. Thank you, sir, for giving me too much time. I'm grateful to you, Mr. Chindu.
Thank you, Professor Tyagi. You reminded me of a small incident I had about. You reminded me of an incident in the headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross in 1990s. One of the persons who attended the meeting was at that time Sir Kenneth Keith. Now he is Judge Keith. So he asked me, what is the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee doing? And I was found saying this. He said he used to be an observer from New Zealand, attending the largest sea debates in the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee. He always enjoyed interacting with Mr. B Sen. Is he still there? Yes. I just wanted to share this with you. May now have the privilege of requesting Mr. B Sen to say a few words.
My esteemed colleague Rajivas Chandran, my former colleagues Professor Chimney, Professor Tyagi, and the Deputy Secretary General of the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization. I feel simply overwhelmed by the whole function and by whatever you are able to sort of gather from it and all the good things that you said about me. And what I wanted to tell you was that I did not intend writing a book. In fact, in the year 2000, Chief Justice Anand had asked me to write a article on about the early days of the Supreme Court. So after that, he mentioned to me, after reading the article, he said, why don't you write something bigger and all that? I forgot all about it. Then Mr. Ramachandran one day talked to me about the Privy Council. Remember? He came to talk to me about the Privy Council. Then he took up the idea and said, please write something about it. And then another Supreme Court Chief Justice, who and I had worked together in some cases together from Allahabad, he told me, you write something, Raju, is a very good idea because information we lost. It's an information we lost which is not there. So that prompted that I thought I should write something, but I never got to it until I was bedridden after an operation. That gave me time to think of the events and all that. And because my secretary was sitting there doing nothing, I started dictating the book to him. And ultimately, Mr. Ramachandran himself revised the book. He corrected the proof and all that. So therefore, the book really, half the credit must go to my friend and colleague Mr. Now, I had stuck to the idea when it was said that some of the information would be lost. So I thought, rather than writing about myself, I would write about the events I've been through. And one difficulty was that I did not want to write anything which is hearsay. I mean, unless I had noticed them myself, then I did not want to put that in writing. There's a lot of things one hears and one suspects and all that. When you're in the ministry, you hear a lot of gossip, you hear a lot of things, but I did not want to write about that except those which I had experienced myself. So for example, I read about Nehru, actual things which I myself witnessed. Because everybody knew that he was a wonderful boss to work with, although he lost his temper every now and then, but laughed at the end of it all. But everybody knew about that. But then I had to experience it before I could write that. So therefore, there are many shortcomings, as you said, that I want to be careful that I do not write anything which is based on hearsay. And also, I would tell you, in one or two comments I mentioned, because Professor Shivji said that I did not mention about no Indian international lawyer. But at that time, way back, thinking of Professor Quincy Wright and Bobbitt during the 1950s. That time, Professor Rahmatullah Khan is one of the persons whom I helped to recruit. Because those days were none. The Professor T.S. Ramarao was there. But even Professor Ramarao had to get somebody from England to come and help him to teach the thing. So that was the reason why, because that time Upper Rai was the man who was to direct the school. But he was not an international lawyer, he was a political scientist. So I have written about Upper Rai, but he is not an international lawyer. So that was the reason why I could not mention about international lawyers. And by the way, I wanted to say that my own background, first degree was in economics. So therefore, in my time, what was normally happening in England was people went for their degree in economics and did law at the same time. Because you know, in my time, after you finished your higher level schooling, that time they call it not A level, but higher certificate. After that, you did your law and your normal degree together. At the same time, in 3 years, you finished both. So normally people did law at university and if you did law at university and also did support. But some of us put it read economics first and then go, then we're not quite sure what we're going to do, because my own idea is not to go for law. My own idea is to go for civil service. But it was circumstances which brought me to law. So therefore, that was the economics and law are so much mixed up that you really cannot really divorce them. I mean, diversify them. And that was the reason why when I came into the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee and got a chance to introduce economics into our organization by taking up trade law subjects and all that kind of thing, we introduced that. And I must say that you have given me credit for things which are not due to me. That I got these ideas from other people. For example, legal and treaties division was not my idea. It was Sir Girija Shankar Vajpayee when he sent me to England for I'm going to him because I wanted to be the British Foreign Office for 3 months for training so that I could assist the Attorney General better in preparing, in advising the external affairs. So when he gave me the letter of introduction, I rather wrote about me to the Under Secretary of the British Foreign Office. He said to me that you might be helpful to us in putting a nucleus of a legal division. So the idea was not really mine, it was his. But then I followed it up. And you said I have a special attraction for Japan. That was true. Because I tell you, the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee would not have come into being except for Japan. Because after, as you know, in developing countries, they keep once a float idea and forget about it. So, but Japan, the Japanese minister then will come and see, ask me what happened to that, what happened to that. So I started sending reminders in my capacity as legal advisor of external affairs. So that was the reason why we came very close to Japan, and I've always been close to Japan. And it culminated in my being given the Order of the Rising Sun. So that is the thing. And I wanted to answer Mr. Raju as to why I call the business. Because you know, when we were admitted to the bar in the Inns of Court as a student, one of the provisions in the syllabus, not in the syllabus, in the prospectus, was that you must be a gentleman of standing, not engaged in business or profession. That was the. So I think that's about all, and thank you very much. As I said, I'm very deeply grateful to Professor Targi to arrange this, and I'm really overwhelmed by what all of you said about me. Thank you very much.
Now the president will give orders back. Mr. B Sen and friends, thank you, sir, for your words of wisdom rather than words of clarification. Speaking for myself, I thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon.